So we're essentially talking about 2 vehicles, and I was there for 15 to 18 minutes in line.
Dang.
And they weren't handing, drink trays. Like, they were handing single orders, so.
Yeah.
Done.
That's where I feel like being a meticulous person, where like you criticize everything, it becomes really frustrating to exist, doesn't it?
The double-edged sword of the problem solver mind.
Yeah, because every single business, I feel like every business I walk into, everyone, I'm like, wow, like, man, you should fix that. Like, man, you should change that. You should really clean that up, or like stuff like that, where you're just like, can I talk to you about your ordering and delivery system?
Yes.
Like here, like, no, like that's actually, so one of my passions is I fell in love with the word momentum. Okay? Because what I love about the concept of momentum is that, like you have the actual like textbook definitions, but the concept that I loved it, like when I broke it down, kind of like, again, functional definition, right? Something continues to move after you stop pushing it. And to me, that's like the secret sauce of like everything that I've seen that's been like awesome, right? Is that they find a way that they build and then they maintain momentum. So whatever the founder, the leader, whoever that person is, right? They give the shove in the right direction, and then it just keeps going and going and going and going. And so then the other side of that is what I've realized is what infuriates me, like what grinds my gears, is where you just see things that have no momentum. Like where you're just like there's no flow here, man. There's no flow. Yeah. Everything is just like it stops and then it restarts and then it stops. And you're like, how exhausting. Like, and even something as simple as that, right? You're like, man, like where's the momentum in this drive-through line, right? Of like how you start and then carry through and deliver. Like,
I think a lot of that is tied to the concept of Genesis. I use this in business a lot. Man made in the image of God.
yes.
Business made in the image of the founder. So they typically have the same strengths and weaknesses.
Yes.
And so when you have that founder, manager, CEO, who is the micromanager, typically it's better, right? Micromanage until trust is established.
Sure.
I believe in.
Yeah.
It's because they demand perfection, such a high standard of excellence. And when you have that, they're going to work on it until it's systematized, until it's not, we have a solution that, like, we got this thing right the single time. It's, we've created the system where this is going to work. And I don't want to call it idiot proof, but really it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's fair.
That's Ray Kroc, that's McDonald's, right? That entire chain was built around the efficiency of a kitchen.
Yes.
And it's where many a teenage person, get their start in the working world. And so I'll just say teenage boys because I once was one. Men, we're all morons until we're like 30, right?
Fair. Yes.
And so it is.
Some
It is
Some
idiot.
hold on to that. Some hold on to that later into life.
This is very true. This is very true.
No, but I think that's, yeah, like just things like that. Where you're like, man. But I guess what blows my mind is what percentage of people do you think actually see it and what percent of people don't? Because it always astounds me, I guess, like how little momentum exists inside of businesses, well, I mean, I guess it probably boils all the way down people's lives, but yeah.
What percentage?
It seems like that's what's frustrating, because it feels like it's a very small percentage. I feel strange in those environments. Like I realize I feel weird because like I'm like, does anyone else see this? And it makes me feel weird, and I don't know. I guess maybe that's why some people would get a complex of like thinking that they're better than other people. But to me, very often it's just like it surprises me because I think everyone would see this. Like you're like, why is nobody seeing this? Like why is nobody understanding this. But I guess that's like the continual frustration. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think the percentage is the people who are?
So I'm gonna give you two classes here. I'm gonna go number one overall, the people who they have the problem solver mindset.
Okay.
Right? That's what I refer to it as. It's less than 10%, like for sure.
Okay.
But then you brought up a subsection of that category, the people who think they're better than others, or, you know, I'm going to say that you've got that crowd and they lack self-awareness. But then you have the crowd, and I try to be in this one, where you have that problem solver mindset, but you realize it's also an inherent, I refer to it as double-edged sword, right? It's a gift.
Yeah.
But when you see everything through that lens, it's rooted in negativity,
Yeah.
right? And so if you have that self-awareness, at least you're aware that, you know, it's actually a problem that resides in me, where I look around and I just see problems. That's probably like 1 to 3%. Self-awareness is difficult.
That probably is realistic of what I feel with people. Yeah. I guess I'd still rather be this way.
For sure.
Like, so I have had seasons. I've had seasons in my leadership over my life, right? Where I think one of the interesting parts with like leadership, right, is like you keep. Well, I don't know how yours has felt. The interesting part with me is I feel like every step of leadership I've taken has been less about me being like, I want to be in charge, and more like me seeing something and having this realization in my mind that like I'm the one who has to do it. Like where it's you have this realization where you're like, I'm the guy. Like, cause you realize like the other people at the table, like they're not the person. Like you can tell how they interact with it. So then like you just kind of decide like, okay, like I'll try it. Like I'll lead it, right? And that goes way back to like obviously my early ministry career, like helping lead student ministry, then starting like college and campus ministry, working for an organization where we built like connections between churches and campus ministries and working with them and all these different pieces. And I think as I was going through that, I was also young, like really young, because I did this right out of high school. So like when I was doing this stuff where I was working with campus ministries and then with pastors, I think I was like 20, 21. And at that time, I remember I used to get this feeling where I would get like leadership, like not burnout, but like leadership exhaustion. So I remember we would like get together with our friends. We would decide we're gonna like whatever, we're gonna get together, we're gonna go rock climbing this Friday, right? And then like in the conversation, people are like, well, like what time should we leave? And like I would have this like aversion where I would like pull back and be like, I don't know, what time do you guys want to leave? And then like nobody would make a decision, and I'd be like, let's leave at 5:45 from my house. Okay, awesome. Be like, great. Where do we want to eat tonight afterwards? I'd be like, I don't know. Where would you guys like to eat? And it was intriguing because I think it was a season where my own like ability to carry stuff, it was fascinating because I would like give a lot to this and I would feel like exhausted, something like that, where I would just be like, please, like just somebody else, like take the lead on this, you know? And I think that it slowly changed over the years though too, because I think that leadership kind of gets like a bad rap in regards to the fact that it is like some sort of hero thought process, right? That people think like, oh man, like aren't you just like, you know, and then I started to realize that most of the people who were like, when we do those things, they want somebody to lead. And it was almost like just a realization that I had to come to in my head where I'm like, I'm a leader. And I guess like that's just part of like who God made me to be, like what he crafted me to be. And I should not like lean out of it. I should just lead. Because honestly, a lot of these people, they want me to lead. They want me to be like, what time do you think we should leave? And they want me to just be like, I think the best time is 5:45. And to them, they're like, Cameron's probably going to pick the best time considering like whatever. Like, yeah, that sounds great, you know, or whatever. And I actually kind of felt myself like re-engage because it was like a season. I don't know, not even a year. But I just remember that feeling of like being exhausted with that feeling of like leadership, and then just realizing, I guess maybe I just have to lean into it because people want people to just like, who are leaders to lead?
Yeah. We desire to be led by a trustworthy authority figure. That's why we follow God.
Yeah. That's a good comment. That's a good comment that maybe even helps me understand that thought process, because that concept of feeling like you're arrogant to lead, but what you're saying is right. People don't want to just lead or follow a quote unquote leader. They want to follow somebody who they trust their character, their personality, I guess, or even, I guess, more so what you were just kind of saying, right? Why we trust God. We actually trust their care for us,
Yeah.
right?
That's the difference between a leader and a boss anyways. Right? Like, everyone's got a boss. Not everyone loves their boss. Everyone loves a good leader. It's not that people want to follow, they want to be led. And I think there's a subtle difference. And there's a couple things at play here with what you brought up. Number one, you are suffering from what's known as decision fatigue. That's why I wear a black t-shirt every day. That's why I have green pants for Monday, dark gray for Tuesday, a different green set on Wednesday, a light gray set on Thursday, and there's a black t-shirt across the board. And I already know what socks are going with that.
Yep.
I don't want to have to spend any energy making those decisions, right? Like, and that comes from the patron saint of entrepreneurs, Steve Jobs, right? Black turtleneck basically every day, or black shirt, Zuck. A lot of
great t-shirt, right?
creative business owners do that so they can reserve their mental energy for other things. So that's decision fatigue. But with you and moving through the seasons, the only difference, it sounded like, was acceptance, right? Like an adjustment in your mindset where you're accepting your position within this social dynamic of they probably want it to be me. They trust me. It probably should be me. I'll let it be me. I went through something very similar. I will roll with the punches until no one throws punches. And then I'm just like, okay, no, this is what we're doing. And I did that for years. And again, it was a me problem where it would cause me frustration with watching the thing not get done.
Yes.
So then I felt like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get this across the line for us so we can move forward together. And now I just go to the optometrist method when I'm asked with a question, this or that. Is this better or is that better? Like 545, 615, what's better for you guys?
Yeah.
And then we choose one and we just move on. Right. And that was for me. That way I wouldn't get pushed back in the realm of like the one-off being like, well, that's not a good time for me. Oh, great. We have these two choices. What works best for everyone? You guys figure this part out.
Yeah.
And now we've made a decision together. And there's, if we do that in business, if we do that with our kids, there's more buy-in to the process because it's not stringent top down.
Yeah.
It's, okay, these are the parameters we need, guys. Go ahead and get this project going. When we're done, let's sit down and review. And then I'll help kind of edit the finality of it.
Yeah.
And people then have the buy-in of their own direction, their own labor going into something, and they're more likely to hold that standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. I like what you said too, though. I'm sure I've heard something like that before, but I like the concept that you said of that people don't want to follow, people want to be led.
I'm sure someone's said that.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm sure I heard that and took that from some brilliant mind. And
yeah. That's an interesting idea, though. It's not that people want to be a follower, right? They desire like a leader. Yeah, leadership in general, that's always been so much of my life. Like, interesting later on in life, looking back and realizing that was like present. And like that capacity for that, I guess, in some sense. Because I don't think I recognized it early on. I had other people recognize it in me.
right.
But it didn't feel like that's what I was trying to be. Like, but it was. when I was a kid, my sister's 3 years older than me, and we would get together, and because of the town we lived in, most of the kids that were in town were actually closer to her age than my age. I was kind of like the younger of those. But we'd get together, and a lot of times even the older boys would be like, what should we do today, Cameron? Like, what are we going to do with this situation? And they were asking me to give input in regards to what we were going to do. And I never thought anything about it. Like, okay, like, sure. And then, you go through middle school, into high school, do stuff like, like student council and like leadership stuff, like, win elections to be student, body leaders, stuff like that, president of student council, different things like that. And I think I like enjoyed them, but like I didn't necessarily like think about it as like, oh, it's because you're like a leader. Right. You know what I mean? Like, well, that's also being a stupid high schooler, and everything's partially still about popularity and everything else like that. But but then even like I was an Eagle Scout. So as an Eagle Scout, you help like once you get past the age of you getting your your Eagle Scout, like then sticking around and being like a senior patrol leader and like leading inside of those, right? And then just one after another of those. I remember I had a conversation with my brother-in-law, one of the first times that we like hung out with him in California. And he said, how did he say it to me? He said something along the lines of like, do you feel like you have some sort of like special calling or like some sort of like special thing about you? Because I was talking about just like ministry and what I wanted to do and all that. He's like, do you feel like it's like something that's like different than the average person? And I said, like, I don't know if I necessarily feel like I'm like a different person in regards to this, but I just felt like this. Yeah, like I guess what I had is I always felt like this drive to do something that was greater, right? Like when he asked that question, it was more so just like I couldn't stand the idea of not accomplishing something great.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, no, yeah, I think I'm someone really special, and I think like this. It was almost just like more so just like a disgust with not accomplishing something of value. And especially then, I was growing in my faith like with the Lord.
How old were you at the time?
That would have been like 18, I think. Yeah, right there. I was really growing my faith to the Lord, so that was like, I was just like, why wouldn't we do something? Like, after me experiencing what I did with Jesus. And so my kind of like salvation story, my mom gave her life to Christ when I was in like third grade, fourth grade. And then I started coming to, be part of church and all that and growing up in it. But I was like learning it in my head, but I wasn't realizing it in my actual spirit. And then that was like when I was 16, where I was like wrestling with all this identity and all this, that I like actually wrestled through the concept of like, if Jesus really is who he said he is, if he really is the Son of God, if he really did die on the cross, if he really did resurrect, if he really did defeat death, if there really is eternity, if there really is heaven, like these pieces, then like, what would that imply for my life? And I was just like, well, my life would be radically different then. And it was kind of like one of those moments where I realized like maybe that is kind of that pull for mediocrity, where like, just the idea of doing something at such like a vanilla level or like a 5 level, I was just like, dude, no, like if that's the case, then like we have to radically change our lives. We have to go to 10, right? And I think that's where that like when he even said those, I was like, no, dude, we have to accomplish something like great. Like I think that it is inside of me, not like because I'm something great, but just because like I have a desire, It blows my mind maybe that some people don't have that desire, but again, back to the percentage points of different people's personalities. I don't know, or maybe it is the fact. I mean, obviously, everyone can't be a leader. You'd be mass amounts of chaos if everyone was a leader, right?
Yeah.
And all throughout God's word, that's the case. I remember looking back through God's word one time when I was wrestling with the concepts of leadership, and I realized that I was like, over and over and over again throughout history. God will generally speak to his people, and then he'll put his finger on one guy, and he's like, stand up and tell him where we're going from here.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of like a freeing moment for me too, like even in my tiny little circle of like what that was, because at the time it was like, you know, like leading like a campus ministry of, you know, whatever, 30 people or something like that. But, you know, this was the biggest thing I'd ever led, you know, at the time, like in my local community, and then doing all these different networking things where you're talking to people who are 10, 15 years older than you, 10, 15 years farther down the road, and they're looking at you and you're like, what do you think I should do, you know? And I guess just realizing the fact that like God tends to work that way, right? Like he tends to put his finger on a leader and then say like, I'm going to talk to you. And like, it's not that he doesn't talk to everybody, he does, but like he talks specific clarity to that leader and he's like, take these people in the right direction.
You know, I think what's interesting is that more often than not, people who accomplish great things, and you know, whether we're talking about athletes or Fortune 500 CEOs, people who drive greatness, they feel called for more. They have, there's been a set of intrinsic thoughts, beliefs, values, and identity where they feel that they're put on this planet with the purpose of doing something great. And so it's one of those things where I think there may be an initial moment of awareness, right? Because we look back and connect dots. When you're young, it's really hard to be reflective. Like I have no idea how few, not only introspective, but reflective young people, 18, 20 and under there are. I certainly wasn't one.
Yeah.
Right? I think you have to get a little time and experience under your belt where someone's got to prompt you, right? Like it's the hero's journey. In the initial phases, whoever the person is, they feel like there's something more within them or out there, but they're not sure. And at some point they meet a guide, right? And in a lot of cases, they initially, I'll use the word cower, like very loosely, but they almost like shirk it off, like, no, it can't be true.
Yeah.
Can't be. But eventually that guide is the one who prompts them or trains them or whatever for the journey ahead. But I feel like it's probably that arc with just about everyone where there's a moment of realization where it's not only am I meant for more, but more importantly, I can do this.
Yeah.
And then you just move confidently in the direction of the goal, of the dream, of the vision. And it becomes something that is encompassing. And here's what I want to tie this to. So what we were talking about. Because of that, then there is no balance in the life. There's only integration.
Yeah.
Right? Readily available examples are going to be like your Kobe Bryant, he's going to practice at 4 a.m.
Right.
There's a great Kobe story from the perspective of another NBA player, how when he got to the Lakers, he went in for practice, and Kobe was already there. And he thought he was going to show Kobe how great he was, and so he practiced. He did whatever for like 3 hours.
Yep.
And then he left because he was tired, and Kobe was still there. And he
Yeah.
talked to him about it. He said, Kobe said, I just wanted to show you that you're not going to work me. I'll be here before you. I'll be here after you, right? And I think on that call to greatness, whatever that is, when you're lucky enough to find that passion and that purpose, it becomes a dominant and almost overwhelming thought. It's an earworm, and it just stays in. And it also becomes the lens that you look through the world through.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people like that. If we take that sample size of 100, we're maybe going to get like 3 of those, 5 of those, and even then it's at varying levels, right? Not everyone ends up Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Michael Jordan, but that's for the best. Because you look around here and we've got, 20,000 people in LaSalle, Peru, and another, I don't know, 40, 50,000 in the surrounding towns. Someone's got to be Michael Jordan here. Someone's got to be Steve Jobs here. And so it's actually for the best that not only is not everyone a leader, but that even within those leaders, there's varying levels that I don't want to say we plateau at, but as far as notoriety, as far as the sample size of humans you affect, it's for the best for everyone involved that there is a plateau for many, because we need leaders at a local level. We need leaders at a family level. You know what I mean? And so it works out best. And I think that that's probably part of God's plan, where there's just there's a finite number who are truly touched.
Yeah.
Because it's a gift and a curse, because it does overtake your mind and the way that you view the world.
Yeah. That made me think of, what is it? Isn't it, I believe in the story of when Moses takes the people to the promised land, his father-in-law Jethro visits him. And it's interesting because Jethro's he's not an Israelite. Like, he's not of the Jewish people, like the chosen people of God. He was an outsider, and that's where he actually met his wife, had his kids. So he basically comes to visit like his grandkids in the promised land. And he shows up, and Moses is sitting in the seat all day from sunup to sundown. And everyone's coming to him and bringing their issues in their communities, in their clans to him, right? Well, in our clan, here's this problem. What do you think, Moses? In our clan, here's this problem. And one after another does it. And it's fascinating because it's one of the cool things about the Old Testament especially is, even though the Israelites, the Jewish people, are the chosen people of God, very often the wisest people in the stories are actually not them. It's an outside force, which is fascinating in what that concept brings. Jethro says, like, this is not good for you. It's not good for them. And he says, like, you need to appoint people who can lead. But what Jethro specifically says, which is really cool, is he's like, there should be, and I believe the declination was something like, there should be like leaders over hundreds, leaders over thousands, like leaders over, and he even like staggered where he's like, there should be a guy that he's like, if they're dealing with stuff, like they go to Steve. Steve deals with the problems for like those 100 people, right? And then like if Steve's like, dude, I don't know, man, I'm not sure. He's like, but like we can go to Tom, because Tom deals with like all of our circles, and he's seen this, right? Like he's even one step smarter than I am in regards to this. They go to him, and then he goes, if it runs through that, and they're still like, man, we're caught on this. He's like, then they should call you. He's like, and then they should come talk to you. And there's this genius picture that he gives of like, even like you kind of were referencing to, that like different people are almost called to like different levels of authority or leadership, right? Like what they have capacity for. And unfortunately, probably because of just like our culture, that feels like it's like a negative thing. Like if you don't have the same capacity as the person who's, the Elon Musk, but I mean, you listen to Elon and you're like, people who are looking at Elon and thinking, how could I implement some of the stuff that he is? You're like, you probably can't implement almost any of what Elon is, because you're talking about somebody who has a capacity level that's obviously well beyond normal humanity, right? But to not be disappointed with the fact that you would reference like, or realize like, this is where I thrive, because there's so much value that you could contribute to that. And also, that's the other side of what I've seen over the years, where you have then very often men, I'm sure it can be the same for women too, but you have men who say are a capacity of like a leader of hundreds, and when they meet somebody who's younger than them, who's a leader of thousands, they're terrified by them, or they try to squash them, because they can see in them the fact that they have a capacity that is beyond what they have.
Yeah, it's fighting that insecurity, and I don't know what that stems from, right? Whether it's envy, whether it's a fear of becoming irrelevant, whether it's a mirror forcing you to stare into the future and questioning your own place in the world. But I think that's a very common trait amongst male leaders. I've definitely experienced that in a lot of the people that I've worked with. And part of it's, it's got to be the male ego. And when you do feel like you're the chosen one, as it were, and you see someone who comes along, it's got to be a very frightening thing. And that's also where the self-awareness, right? So few people have that. We talked about that sample size earlier. But to have the self-awareness that the goal of a leader should be ultimately that they foster a leader who's better than them, right?
That's a good concept.
I mentioned to you before men's group kicked off, and I said we don't judge a leader based on how many followers they have. We should judge a leader based on how many leaders they create.
Yeah, that's good.
The goal of a father should be to have their son surpass them
Yes.
in some way. And I think of leadership as a mixture of stewardship and parenting. I want people who are going to not only step out of whatever shadow that they're behind me in, I want them ultimately to surpass me, right? Like we can think of in football, there's the Bill Walsh coaching tree, the coach from the 49ers back in the 80s. And I believe Belichick from the Patriots came from him. And Bill Belichick is regarded as probably the greatest NFL coach in history. And he's got a coaching tree. But that's what stands the test of time. It's not just the championships you won, it's how many other amazing coaches came from you under your tutelage. Right? Like we can look at Yoda, but Luke is the main hero. Right? We look at Miyagi, it's Daniel-san is the perspective it comes through. And there's so many different pop culture historical examples. But I think it's, again, that small sample size of leaders who have that concept down where it's like, no, this is my thing to lead, but ultimately, I'm not going to live forever. The only thing that truly can live forever is your legacy. And I want someone greater than me because if I'm trying to hand something down, I want it in hands that not only are as capable of mine, but if the thing that I've built, because I've been called to greatness, I want that to outlive me, but I want it to get better than the level I could have taken it to. I want my son to be able to take this to a higher level. Therefore, he's got to be greater than I could ever be. And I think that's very rewarding, and I think it's very sad that so many leaders won't ever get that moment of joy because they don't even have that mindset. They think, I'm supposed to be the one. This is tied to me, but I think that's an ego thing. Right? Ego's great. All gifts are double-edged swords.
True.
If you don't have an ego, you probably don't believe that you're more capable, that you're willing to sacrifice certain things because you can be better, because you can make something better. You need ego for that. But it's understanding that I need to have an ego until it gets in the way. And then I have to push this thing aside because chasing greatness, being a leader, that's pouring into something greater than yourself. And if you cut it off because it's simply a reflection of you, this thing never gets as good as it should be. And you will never be the leader that you could have been.
Man, lots of thoughts out of that. Why does everyone want to be Luke instead of Yoda? Ego? Because no one watches the story and thinks, I want to be Yoda. Maybe some, but I mean, everyone's like, every boy, right? I'm Luke Skywalker. Right away, right? But, there is no Luke Skywalker without Yoda.
I think it's because, and you hit the nail on the head, it's every boy. I think as we move through seasons of life, the more and more we've seen, the more reflective we can be. You're not going to see a boy who wants to be Yoda. But someone who's been Luke already, they want to be Yoda.
And maybe that's not even right. You probably shouldn't desire to be Yoda when you're Luke. Or when you're a boy, when you're not even Luke yet, right?
You got to go through step 1 before you can get to step 2.
Hence the problematic culture we live in, where people who've never done stuff are currently making things online to teach you how to do stuff. People who are trying to literally build their lives around pretending like they're Yoda. I'm going to teach you how to blank. I'm going to teach you how to whatever. And I mean, it's in every circle. Obviously, you spend a lot of time in the business circle. That's been your world. I love the business circle. I spend a lot of time in the like faith in that circle, right? But just for instance, okay? 2 years ago, I went to this pastor's conference. It was terrific. It's a good conference altogether. Not saying anything negative out of all of it, right? But one of the speakers was one of the main pastors from this church's father, okay? And this dude has been in it for like 50 years. Like started preaching when he was like 18 years old. He's been 50 years deep into this, right? And he gets up and gives this message, and I get done, and I tell Amy, I'm like, that was the best talk I've heard this entire conference. That was the best talk I've heard in years in regards to being in this position, right? And I told her, I was like, we need less conferences of young, charismatic men, and we need more conferences of battle-hardened grandfathers who they're 50 years deep, who they might not have the flash that everyone else does of communication, but that dude gets up there and just starts talking about what life is, and you're like, yes, like you should be the one who's talking, because like exactly like Yoda, right? Like you've done the reps, you've done the life. And sometimes when it does feel like it's like, you know, actually years ago, I remember hearing Stephen Furtick say this in a conference that he went to. He spoke on like this main stage of this conference, and he said like, do you know where I was at last year? He's like, up there. He's like, and no one asked to talk to me. No one was trying to shake my hand. And he's like, do you know what the difference is? He's like, nothing really. He's like, just God moved. He's like, and our church has seen some success. But he's like, people assume that something has like, oh, he figured something out between then and here. And he's like, I really haven't. And it was kind of a humble confession of like, some of what you experience, especially early on, you're like, I don't even know why this is working yet, right?
Yeah.
Like you're gonna run that out, but it's like, right, like someone like this dude who's like 50 years in, where you're just like, dude, you've seen every season. Like, and yeah, like people of our current culture, I feel like there's so much of that where everyone's like wants to like teach you something, and you're like, you haven't even done it.
22-year-old life coaches?
100%. Yeah, like I'm in a life coach, and you're like, you haven't lived any life yet, right? And like that's the reality that I definitely feel, because even if I'm 15 years into pastoring like a church, right? When we started, so much of the questions that I would get, or so much of the concepts that I would deal with, I'm dealing with them for the very first time. I've never walked through them before. And one of the benefits that you definitely get after even just say 15 years in, right, is like, I've walked through these before.
Yep.
And they hit different. They feel different. The conversations hit different. You know, I used to get really emotional, right? And it's not that like I've become like a cold person, but part of like the benefit of like the professional at whatever you've done, you put in your 10,000 hours, right? Is it doesn't throw you when someone walks in and they're like, you know, I'm out, man. And like where on year one, right, it's like every emotion fires off, right? Like fear, anger, anxiety, all these different things. But then if you've walked through that 15 times, you just go, okay, well, you know, what's going on? And you talk, and you can have that because you're like, I've done this conversation multiple times, right? And I've survived through it every single time. And then like that's that benefit of why we should be talking to those 70-year-old people, because you're like, right, like I know, like even now, I have years and years and years stretching out ahead of me. But if I talk to the young 20-something who's talking about like, say, growing a church or whatever, like I can tell them like, here's some things you should prepare for, because like I've walked through them multiple times. And it's not from the sense of like, I'm smarter than you. It's just like, I've just already taken more punches. And like, you know what I mean? Like that's the game. That's the Yoda, right? Like I've already fought 1,000 things. So let me explain to you what this here. Again, not like just the idea of The sage is like the idea you know some sort of secret knowledge that someone else doesn't, which maybe you could still codify that way. But almost the other part's like, no, it's just like I've just taken more shots.
Yeah.
So I can tell you what it feels like. Like, you know, like if you sat down and talked to Mike Tyson and asked him what it feels like to take a punch, he could describe it at a way that none of us could ever understand.
Yeah.
Because you've gotten hit in the head 10,000 times,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Oh, there's a lot going on there. You're the leader, and you're charismatic, and you have high IQ, and you have all these things going for you, but you don't have that experience yet. And you go to deal with it the first time, and all the emotions come in because there's a block of uncertainty.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is going to be like, right? Uncertainty is a very scary thing for humans. Whereas the person, speaking of Mike Tyson, the person who's walked the path, they have experience. They know what's on the other side.
Yeah.
And they know what's on the other side, not once, not twice, 12, 13 times. And so they also know the reaction of different people. It's not always going to be the same, but I'm still here, they're still here. Everything's going to be all right, right? When you have that uncertainty, that fear of the unknown, you don't know that everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see different levels of emotion.
Yep.
Yeah, that's where the expression act like you've been there before comes from, right? I think that it's one of those things, and we can always tie it back to its experience. Experience is the separator. You can have the knowledge, right? You can go to school and you can learn about business, and every college across the country is full of people who never made it,
Yeah.
never did the thing,
Yep.
right? The best way to learn about anything is on-the-job training. You want to know how to run a business, start a business.
Yep.
Like, get into the trenches, right? And it's the very same thing. To speak to what you were talking about with Stephen Furtick, that's the power of attention, right? Just because we see someone's face all the time, we start to be like, well, they must know what they're doing. I can remember we're in 2020, and so we had built a business, me and another guy, and then my wife was involved and one of my good friends, so there were 4 of us. And we took this thing from $30,000 months to, I don't know, we did like 2.2 million, and it was almost overnight.
2.2 million in a month?
No. So we went from...
Or 2.2 million
in a year.
In a year. Okay, gotcha. Yes.
So from like
Yeah,
30K
still.
months to, $1 to $250,000.
Yeah,
months.
10x. Yes.
And we had a conversation. We were going to try to rapidly expand. So we were going to talk about getting some financing. We had a good friend who was a Wall Street guy. And we got on a call with another Wall Street guy. And you could tell by this guy's voice that he was probably 68 years old and 280 pounds, just bulging out of his suit coat. And he heard our story and he's like, you guys are successful despite yourselves. And I think that's a lot of what it is, because people are driven to do the thing. So they're willing to get on social media. They're willing to get in front of the camera. They're willing to work the ungodly hours, and success is just going to be a byproduct of that. Just willing to do the work. But along the way, when you're young, you've been successful despite yourself, not because of yourself, right? And there's many, many such cases of that. But that's great because it gets you to a really good starting point. So you can realize, like, you get over a hump in a certain way where you've built success, but you just see new humps along the way, right? Like, same level of stress. I have this conversation all the time because I deal with businesses at varying levels. I'd be like, I just can't wait till this part's over. I'm like, it's never over. Right. You're just, the decisions you're making just have an extra zero attached to them at a different level. The stress level is the same. It's just, how do you learn to deal with the stress? Right? It never changes. Like, I always compare it to a climb. And my goal is to be Yoda, right? Like, I'm the Sherpa. I'm not a mountaineer. You can go to a mountaineer and you can learn how to climb a mountain, or you can just go to that guy who's been up and down it 100 times and he knows where the footholds are, right? Like, it's your path. I'm just here to make sure you don't fall off the cliff.
Yeah.
But you get higher and higher all the time. And it's still that same steep incline. The only difference is you're just higher to fall from.
Yeah.
Right? But you wouldn't want it to be any different, because if you're not going up, you're just staying the same.
Right.
You're never growing. You're never evolving. You're never getting better.
Yeah.
And that is the goal. The goal is evolution.
Yeah.
And it's Ray Dalio, Principles, says that evolution is our greatest challenge and our greatest reward. And it is. You can go from that person who, there's signs in your youth. You've spoken to that earlier here. And eventually you look back and you're like, wait a minute. I am meant for more. And then it grows. And then it grows some more. And then it grows some more. And in the wake, all you're doing is impacting lives.
Yeah.
And the further you can go on your journey, the more lives you impact. But there gets a certain point where you start to become Yoda. And you realize that you are the hero of the story, and your goal has changed from being the hero to being the guide. And you're just here to bring other heroes along and cultivate them and bring them to success. And I think that's the pinnacle of leadership, when you realize I'm actually just a guide at this point.
Yeah. That mindset is really interesting because, like that mindset of like the coach and like that call to leadership. I remember I just heard a guy who was saying, like he was trying to encourage men to find guides, okay? People like that. And he said, initially what most people do is they look for someone who's better than them at something, and then they want them to coach them. But he said, what's really interesting about that is there will come a place where basically, like, you will achieve a level of success in whatever you're doing that there are very likely not other people who are better than you at that thing who are going to coach you. It won't exist, but you still need a coach. And his comment was like, he's like, right, like you brought up, Patriots coach, right?
Yeah, Belichick.
Belichick, right? Because he worked for years and years with Brady, right? Right. There's no way that Belichick could throw a ball or, run plays as good as Tom Brady could.
Right.
There's no way. But Tom Brady couldn't be the level of a quarterback he was if he didn't have Belichick. It would be foolish for him to go like, you're not as good as football as me.
Right.
And you're like, well, right, but he's a better coach. Luke, right, could be like, well, like, I'm actually stronger than you now, right? It's like, right, but, and that's the interesting idea with that. Maybe, so is that the concept of not just like the performance of it? Is that the concept of the coach is, it's not that they can play that position better, but they understand the game better, or they understand?
It's meta.
Right.
Right. I understand what you're trying to do. I understand where you're at on your journey.
Yeah.
Let me show you how you fit into a greater ecosystem. When you have this understanding, you get to affect that ecosystem, because right now you're the individual. You can only affect what it is that you do. Right? If you're trying to be the best pastor you can be, there's a lot of subsections of skill within that you constantly have to level those up. But at the greatest is not just how do you affect your church, it's how does this church affect this community.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just always looking at the bigger ecosystem, because we're all rivers and we all pour into something bigger than ourselves. And so it's not just taking the view of how good can I be at this one thing? How good can I be at affecting change in everything? Right? Primarily health and fitness is my background. And so I have conversations with personal trainers frequently. And the thing that I try to remind them of the most is a good personal trainer they make that the best hour of someone's day.
Yeah.
A great personal trainer affects the other 23 hours.
Ooh, that's a good transition. Yes. That's like one for one what my job is as a pastor, except it's 1 to 167, right?
Yeah.
Because I have a weekly cadence with people. And right, good pastors show up and they're like, man, that was a great message.
Yep.
Man, that was, right? That's a good pastor.
Yep.
Right. A great pastor is the other 167 are different, right?
That was a great message. I feel great about my relationship with God. I feel great about where my life is going. I feel great about my family. I'm motivated to be better on Sunday. How can we drive that
Yes.
until 9 a.m.
Yes.
the next Sunday?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yes. Back to momentum.
Yes.
One of the ways that I coined that a while ago when I was talking to someone about it, just because of that drive for momentum, I actually love, you do it on a professional basis. I've just done it on a fun basis with people so far, where I talk to people who are business owners, and the way that I stated that one time is I was like, motivation, it runs out before 5 o'clock on Friday.
Absolutely.
Momentum carries through till 9 o'clock on Monday.
Yes.
Right? Because if there's this feeling of momentum, if it's just motivation, it just tanks off, right? But when there's that momentum, and to me, right, when you can actually see that your life, your energy is part of that momentum of what's moving, of what's changing, what's happening, right? It's like, right, that carries through all the way back around, where it's like, you don't have to start the day on Monday morning trying to remotivate your team, remotivate this, where you're like, because we know what we're part of, we know what we're in. I don't have to build that back up and then it depletes down. We see the flywheel of what we're doing and we carry that momentum through. Yeah.
But motivation is necessary, especially in what you do. It's necessary all the time because people are constantly coming in at a different level, right? Like one of the biggest misconceptions of commonplace information in our age is you don't need motivation, you need discipline. You're never going to get to a point where you are disciplined if at one point you were not motivated to change something, right? And so motivation and inspiration should be a regular occurrence. And that's why Furtick is who he is. It's because he mixes the word with a motivational talk, right? And he's highly skilled.
Yes.
There are natural gifts, but a lot of this is, and people don't understand that when they see him. None of this is just a coincidence, and it's not. There's God-given purpose, but then there's the work.
Yeah, totally.
Right? But I believe that is why he has become such a success seemingly overnight, right?
Right.
Like 5-6 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, he blew up like crazy. Their church blew up really quick, which is crazy because I followed them when we were planning our church. I was watching theirs. Their church blew up really quick, and then what happened is after their church went from literally a church plant to, I forget if it was like 6,000 or 7,000 people or something crazy like that. In the course of I think it was like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Then what happened is then it started his journey at about that level was when he went from being this kind of people knew about him in the Southern Baptist Convention down there who knew about him, to then all of a sudden, his name, he released his first book, he started doing these things, and all of a sudden it was that was the next, 5 to 10 years as far as what his story has been, where people are it is amazing how much of his is a staple name that people understand. Also, too, though, the funny part with it is he's a good depiction of the fact that the more influence you're going to have, the more hate you are constantly going to receive.
For sure.
I don't know if I've found any person who gets more hate than Stephen Furtick online. I mean, it's just you talk about the amount of arrows and the amount of bombs that get thrown, but that has to be that's the other side of influence, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, I think we had this conversation when we were talking previously about Alex Hormozy, obviously, where he was saying about even his mentor saying the idea of like turning into something where people actually know you. Like he's like, isn't that like a negative? And he just said like, if that's the price that I have to pay for the amount of influence that I want to have on the world, like I'll pay it every day. Like the idea that you're going to get all of this other stuff where you're like, I don't know if I want that. And you're like, well, do you actually want the influence then?
Right.
Because like if you want to have influence, like that's totally going to be the other part of it, right? Is that's going to come with it too. And what's wild is like, again, you need to put in the reps because, man, I remember the early years of like our church and people just like making comments and stuff like that, and it would just like stick in me.
Sure.
Like you talk about just like dwelling on something and like going over it, right, and being like, well, I should have said this. Like like just like, oh man. So bad.
Hit you in the shower.
Dude,
this would have been
so
perfect.
Bad. So bad.
Yeah.
And like the crazy stuff that people come up with where you're like, what? Like I remember we were planning our church, like people showed up and I remember this guy's like, I heard that you make everyone get matching tattoos to join your church. And I was like, what?
Yes, we're that kind
What?
of cult.
I was like, nah. I was like, I have one tattoo. One. I was like, no. I'm like, I definitely don't. But just like the craziness of like the stuff that gets like said, right? And I remember it just like, man, just like eating at you so much, right? And then again, like this is the part of like you have to put in the time and you have to survive those things. And I guess maybe that is part of like, you can't become, right, like you take a blade, you forge it together, you heat it up and you squelch it and cool it down, and you heat it up and you squelch it and cool it down, and you heat it up and you squelch it and you cool it down, and it gets harder and can get a sharper and sharper and sharper point, right? And like that's just the reality that like you have to go through those cycles, and people don't want to go through them, but like that's the only path where you get to the other side.
Yep.
You said earlier the concept of like leadership, kind of like I believe you said stewardship plus kind of like parenting, right? And like that's like good parenting. Like the parents who won't let their kids go through anything, like they destroy their children.
Absolutely.
They destroy them, right?
Absolutely. Soft as Charmin.
Yeah, and we've seen that in our culture, even just in the last handful of years, right? There was such a move towards such gentle parenting and such all these things, right? And it created people who are deeply unhealthy, all throughout our culture. Where the other side is like, right, like actually taking your kid and letting them go through some of those moments. Like, I mean, and it's hard. So my children are young, right? But like, Silas played soccer last year, and Silas, my oldest son, very, very competitive, very just much like dad. When I see him especially, I get weird flashbacks to me because like very competitive, but then also like right now, really hard to control his emotions.
Yeah.
If I strike out at the plate, like you just see his face change, right? He can't do like to just like blow it off, like no big deal. And I'm like, that was me, 100%. Like I remember that feeling. Like it's either like 100% or like I'm 0%, like crushed by the fact like I couldn't hit that ball, right? He ended up playing soccer last year, and we played one of these games, and he won a couple of different ones in this. And then the one game, they just got destroyed. I mean, just destroyed. They had some bigger kids on this team, and Silas came off the field, and he's just red. Obviously tired, sweaty, but also just red. Where I could see him like, dude, lots and lots of emotions, right? And I like encouraged him, and like I really like getting in the car. And my wife said something to the effect of like, oh, like, I wonder how he's going to be like the rest of the day in this, like kind of like saying like, it's too bad that happened. Yeah. And I was like, this day is just as important as last week when they won.
Yep.
This day's critical. Like you have to go through the day where you get destroyed, and then you have to figure out like how you can be like okay. Like, you can walk through that. And I was like, today's a great day, because I was like, when he's like goes through this, we get to like bring him through this. We get to let him like coach through this, and then that's going to make him all the better, right? I was like, you definitely like anything like sports like that. That's such a great day too, because you're like, you do realize last week when you guys crushed it, that's what the other team felt like.
Yep.
That's why we implement something like sportsmanship, because you understand, like, yeah, my victory comes at your defeat, and you shake their hand and you're like, good game.
Yes.
Because you're like, right, I know exactly what it feels like to be on the other side, where you have all these hopes and they're just smashed, right? Yeah.
Those days are more important than the days of winning. And I love the emotional trait, right? Like, when my son loses, I want to see emotion. Now, as he gets older,
Yeah.
and there's a level of self-mastery, I don't want to see that as much. But so my son wrestles in high school for LP.
Okay.
And there was a kid earlier this year, he's a freshman, Juju. Hard fought bout, and he lost. And as soon as he lost, slammed the mat, yelled the F word, and a couple parents gasped, and I was like, that's good. That's a good thing.
He's got that
He's got that in him.
Yeah.
Right? And the greats, they don't love to win. They hate to lose.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to see that trait, because I want you to deal with loss.
Sure.
But I want you to keep that pain.
Yeah.
Right? I want you to hold on to that, and I want that to fuel you. Let that fuel your improvement, because your love for winning is never going to fuel you to greatness in anything that you do. It's got to be the borderline hatred for whatever the stick is. It's not for the love of the carrot. Like, we only run from pain or to pleasure. But the people who run to pleasure only make it so far. Because they're usually not willing to delay that pleasure, that delayed gratification.
Yeah.
So they run to other sources of pleasure that are immediately available.
Yes.
That are just sucks. And so you
Yeah.
never go up because you went this way and it pulled you in. And so you can't go up.
Yeah.
Right? But if we hate this so much, it means that we'll never get here either. And so the only choice then is to go this way. And it's a harder path to want to practice more. Away from practice, away from school, when everyone else is on the iPad. And by the way, we have this generation that we do, because at some point, parents had the ability to hand their kids who are crying in a restaurant an iPad.
Yeah.
Right? That coloring, when we were younger, and I'm sure they still have them, but when you go to a restaurant, they give you the menu and the crayons.
Yep.
Tic-tac-toe ran out.
Yep.
And eventually you colored everything.
Yeah.
So at some point, boredom was all that was left, self-management.
Yeah.
But we have a generation of kids who are now adults who, when they cried, they got an iPad. At some point, you get off the pacifier. They never got off
Yeah.
the pacifier.
Yeah.
And so that's where entitlement comes from. That's where soft as Charmin comes from. That's where this culture war that's been brewing since 2013 and going on still to this day comes from.
Yeah.
It's just a progression of generations, right? Like the book The Fourth Turning was written in the 90s, and everyone knows it as good men create hard times, right? Like that's square.
Yep.
Right.
Good man. Yeah. Strong men, good times.
Strong men, good times.
Good times, weak men. Weak men,
hard times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hard times, strong men.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that book is brilliant. Everyone should read it.
I just reread it, actually, just this last year. Yes.
I think I listened to it on audio last year or the year before, right? Big fan of rereading, right? No man ever steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, he is not the same man. I reread the same books every 2 years. And then I'll throw new stuff in.
Yep.
But constantly going back, because
that's a good side note. More people should read less books, but read good books more often.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, I'm a pastor. I tell people to read the Bible literally every single week. It's like, you should read that again.
Yes.
And 100%. I've read through the Bible now. I gave my life to Christ when I was 16. for serious. Right now, I'm 38 years old. I have probably read through the Bible, like reading through it, probably 15 to 20 times in that time frame. And then obviously I've studied through sections of it countless numbers of times.
Yeah.
Exactly correct. I read this morning, I'm reading in Acts, and I read it, and it is different. Twofold. One, the first part that you said, which is totally true. I'm different.
Yep.
Absolutely. Then two, obviously, special note, the Bible changes as we continue to read it because it's inspired by the living God. But, sorry, yes, that's just a great point. Yes, more people need to read good books multiple times because that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, man.
Yep.
We should probably pause.
Yes. Although I didn't want to leave a statement that you made that I actually think was genius, and I don't know if you've already said this multiple times, but if you haven't, you should capture this because it's terrific. You said something to the effect of, for those kids, the iPad generation, that boredom is self-management.
Yes.
That might be one of the coolest things I've heard today. No, because that's a great way of explaining what boredom is. Self-management.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, right, in the iPad generation, we eliminated their ability to grow that quality or that skill. To be able to manage yourself, to be able to be, to literally to just be, right? To not have to have someone else or something else carry and fix your attention or carry or fix your whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's...
You can look at teenagers today and preteens. While the video game is loading, while that Call of Duty or Fortnite screen is buffering, their phone is in their hand and they're checking something, or they're playing another game, or there's something like that. And so whether we look at that from a chasing dopamine perspective, that constant need for stimulus, or how it's going to affect them later in life, where when they're forced into those opportunities to self-manage, because they're coming when you get a job.
Yeah.
What replaces it is anxiety, right? There's always got to be something there for people who there's always got to be something there. And when you don't have that pacifier, anxiety is what replaces that thing.
Dang.
And so our goal should be to become anti-fragile.
Yes.
Right? Where it's the knocks in life that actually make us stronger.
Yep. Coddling of the American Mind. Book plug.
Phenomenal.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Very good.
But when we don't do that with our children, especially young age, right? Prefrontal cortex doesn't really come into full development until 25, and it's only going later in life because of all these things. We're kneecapping them. Because eventually you have to enter the real world that's already been established by 1, 2, 3, 4 generations before you, and you have to adhere to their rules, right?
Sure.
Also part of the culture war we're seeing right now, right? Where you have an entire generation who were raised with instant gratification, and they think everything has got to be shaped around this, and they're meeting the resistance of prior generations that, like, we didn't grow up with that. This is the way that things are. Well, this is the way things should be, but they're not.
Yeah.
Right? But they are not.
Yeah.
And so it's like hitting a wall immediately because they cannot manage themselves. And it's having a terrible ripple effect all throughout society.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, boredom. I had that thought even just for myself a couple of years ago. I did a series of talks that I just called Stop. Okay. Because you have this constant cycle of just my phone's on the floor currently, but right, it's like what you just said was so true. A pause in even a conversation, and I'm pulling out my phone to like look at it, right? I jump in my truck to go across town. I'm just driving 10 minutes.
Yep.
Open, I need to put on a podcast. I need to listen to something, right? And there's this constant, like, just the grind of it. And my thought process with that is I was like, I'm not sure, well, I'm pretty sure the opposite. I don't believe we were meant to exist at that frequency.
No, definitely not.
Right? It's way, way, way too much. People used to wake up. You would have some sort of circle with your family, right? And for the average man, they would go and they would work for 12 hours. And a lot of those people would not talk to anyone that entire time. It would literally be silence for 12 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're a woodworker, you're a farmer, you're whatever. You just literally work in silence for 12 hours. And then you come back and you talk to your family, right? Some who would work together, right? Mm-hmm. There might be communication. But obviously, as men who work together on things, that's still a different level. A lot of that communication, it's not really even communication. You're simply stating what each other needs to do, working together with things, right? And then, of course, like, you know, the break or the end of the day where you have communication. And thinking about that, like when we take into the concepts, me, again, as a pastor, right? When we talk about things that are in God's word that say, like, pray without ceasing, like telling God what you need and thanking him for what he's done, these concepts. People used to have hours and hours that really the only person they could talk with was God. They would be speaking to the Lord in their mind, listening for his voice, right? Hearing the nudges of the Spirit as they go through their day, and then sharing what's on their heart with the Lord and then receiving that. And in our current world, I think that probably the modern American Christian probably prays less than 5 minutes in a day. Because there's everything that keeps our attention. And then literally when we go to pray, it's like you're trying to like push those away and you almost can't just to even get 5 minutes to be able to like have that moment to be able to pray. So I did the series Stop, S-T-O-P. And the whole thing I told people is I'm like, you literally, first of all, you just need to stop. And then I'm like, when you don't leverage directly into technology, you can do T-O-P, which is you can literally just think, observe, and pray.
Yeah.
Think, observe, and pray. Think, right? I'm terrified that a lot of people aren't thinking their own thoughts anymore.
Oh, for sure.
All they're doing is hearing other people's thoughts and just regurgitating those same thoughts. That's it. It's just like they told me what to think. I was listening to what they thought. And they're not actually like pausing and going, what do I think? Right? Observe. The resolution that people are living at is perpetually decreasing. You know, I think you see it in everything that is around us. You watch people as they participate in the world around them, and they're sucked into screens or technology. Everyone who runs has to have headphones. I go hiking in the woods with the kids, and tons of people now headphones or music that they have playing.
Bizarre,
right? They're walking, they're looking at their phone. They're driving, they're listening to this, right? And operating at this massively lower resolution than the world that actually exists around them. I think that's a reflection of even what we see in regards to architecture. Architecture is simplified massively.
Oh, yeah.
People aren't looking at buildings and wondering at their beauty or at their craftsmanship. Yes. It's low resolution, thumbnail sketch.
Yep.
Sure, done.
Breaking the human
spirit.
Yeah.
Totally, right? And then obviously pray. People are, I don't have any time to communicate with God. And that idea of actually being in communication with the Lord, going back and forth and sharing what those things are. I remember I was looking, because we talk about all the time, like the concept of Sabbath. And Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath. We're not bound to a law of Sabbath anymore. But the fascinating part is so many people in our American culture now, they're like, there's no way I have time to like take an actual Sabbath. Well, the fascinating part is most people on average, if you actually add up what their technology usage is for a week, they spend over 24 hours on tech.
Oh, for sure.
You spent an entire day in those portals where you had an entire Sabbath. You had an entire day's worth of time that you could be mindful, conscious, communicating with God, listening for his voice. But we give those things away. My new thought, I think I need to bring back a new message in this next couple of years, is I was thinking again, like, are you led by the Spirit or are you controlled by the algorithm?
Beautiful.
Because I'm really fearful that a lot of us, even, I'm not saying like, not people who like don't care, people who say, man, I'm a Jesus follower, man, I care, that we're walking around, I mean, for another symbolism, we're just jacked into the matrix, just being force-fed whatever it is around us, and we're not even having our own thoughts.
There's so much there. Focus is difficult, and it's become more difficult because we have an abundance of distraction. People are pre-programmed. Most, and they always have been, right? We can look at the shots of people on public transit in this position, but at some point, if you've been on the internet long enough, you see it's not even a meme, it's just a comparison of two photos where it goes back to black and white in the 20s, and it's men in suits and hats, and they all have the newspaper.
Yep, I've seen
right?
that. Yes,
and that's just, I think, being human in a certain manner. The vessel is extremely difficult, or different and more powerful now, right? Like a newspaper, you actually had to read.
Yeah. Yes.
You couldn't listen to it. And so it's changed, and reading is phenomenal for your brain and your thought process, and constantly watching something, constantly listening to something is not, right? And we have an abundance of distraction now. To go to what you said about especially the driving part, where we always have to have something on, I think that there's a good scenario and there's a bad scenario, and it all has to do with intention. If I'm driving, me personally, I've got on either 104.7 or I have an audiobook on, right? Once upon a time when I was in a factory setting, in a lower skilled job driving a forklift, I hid my phone in my hard hat because I was looking for a way out, right? And so I was constantly educating, listening to something with the intention of, I gotta go, I gotta do something better, right? And so I think if the intention is there where you're like, I just need to, I have to learn this. I think that's good. But if it's, I constantly need to be pacified, that's an absolutely terrible thing. And you said something else that I think has always been true, but again, it's exacerbated now. People aren't having their own thoughts. And they never have. It's just now, if we go back even 30 years, there were less thought leaders. There were less people of authority and influence that you could readily consume their opinion. But now they're everywhere. And it's people who haven't done anything with their life. Right? And so your source of information isn't nearly as quality as it used to be in many cases either. For every Andrew Huberman, there are 100 Jake Pauls. Right? So I don't think it's changed. I think it's just gotten worse. And it all starts with the initial thought, and we spoke about this earlier. You were meant for more. Not enough people have taken their own hero's journey, where they go from, we are this present being who is reacting to our life, to a person of, I think I know what's next. I have to do that thing. And in order to do that thing, I have to let go of other things. I have to sacrifice for what it is that I really want, right? Like John 3:16. We all get everlasting life because he gave his son.
Yes. Yes.
Typically, you have to give up the thing that you love
Yes.
the most, right?
Even our response to John 3:16, right? Like, men's, he who loves the world has not the love of the Father in him, right?
Yeah.
You have to let go, like you just said, you have to sacrifice one thing in order to have another. When you say, but I still, it's like you can't leave that if you're still clinging to it.
Yeah, you can't take that camel with you.
Yep, totally.
And it's different forms for different people, right? And it's usually at the source of our problems. We have an obesity epidemic. We spend more money on health and fitness than we ever have as a country. We're more unhealthy.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot that goes with that. And we
Yes.
can take it all the way up the government and all the way down the rabbit holes. But at the end of it, we know what we should do. Like, I should probably eat meat. I should probably grow up and eat my vegetables. I should do these things. But man, are those Twinkies delicious.
Yep.
And it's hard for people to give those things up. The things with addictive qualities. Like, I know social media is making me dumber, but I can't stop doing this. I can't stop doing this.
Yeah.
And it's hard to give up because it's just dug its way in, right? Like, at the beginning of this, we talked about greatness and how it has its obsessive components and it's an earworm. And so it affects the way that you move through life and the lens that you see the world with. But I would argue that that's the way, because it means I don't have time for this, right? You and I have talked in the past about the message that I put into my kids and into my house. Like, we're not like everyone else.
Yes.
What happens outside of these four walls, those are different people,
Yep.
right? Like, we eat a certain way because we see the downfall of the way that business is carried out as usual.
Yep.
The way that we curate what we consume information-wise. And it's not a left versus right standard because they both have faults.
Totally.
It's a what's right and what's wrong, what's going to lead to a better tomorrow standard.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that until people, I don't even want to say unplug from the matrix, right? Like, if we take the Andrew Tate route where like you need to unplug, he missed the point.
Agreed.
The point was to become Neo. The point was to bend the spoons, to download skills on demand so you can dominate the matrix, right? And it's the same thing while we're here on this earth.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to leave the earth eventually and go to heaven, but while we're here, the goal is to increase your skill level, increase your emotional intelligence, the way that you have capacity to deal with other humans and relationships, and to constantly pursue more, not in a consumption manner, but in an impact manner.
Yeah.
Right? How can I be part of this bigger ecosystem, Tom Brady, right? We're back here again, where how can I affect all of this in a positive manner?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way, because it's rooted in ego and self-improvement, right? Like very right-leaning standards.
Sure.
But it goes into, how can I make everyone around me better? How can I make everyone get, how can I positively affect everyone else? How can I be the rising tide?
Yeah.
Right? Like, in my book, that's the goal, because you understand that you have to improve yourself, not for improving yourself, but for improving everyone and everything around you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that is the way, and that is the goal, because the reality is we all need each other.
Yes.
For every leader at every level, we have to have followers at every level. It's on the leader to set the standard, to bring people up with them, right next to them, so that they hold the standard. So it's not their standard, it's not my boss's standard, it's our standard. You have to clone yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
She's got to clone herself. You got to clone yourself.
Yes.
Because then everyone around us gets better. And when everyone around us gets better, society gets better.
Yes.
Right? But it takes all of us moving in an ecosystem and having that mentality. I suggest a lot of movies and books to a lot of the business owners I work with.
Yeah. I think it's great too, because that's our modern art.
Absolutely.
You go back and it used to be paintings, beautiful murals,
For sure.
the way buildings are. There's some of that, but I think that, like, to pull away from that, I think can be actually foolish, because I think that is like our modern art that is encapsulating meta concepts, meta principles,
Yes.
those pieces, and then putting them in a digestible thing. I think sometimes we lean out from that, but like even the references of movies and those pieces, I think are so poignant in regards to pulling into actually understanding concepts and kind of like experiencing them. And then the goal is then you ingesting that and then thinking about it yourself, right? Yes.
Every Sunday night we do family movie night. Almost every Sunday night we do family movie night. And it's my wife, myself, and we have 2 teen boys under the roof, right? We've got an older daughter who's not with us. As in, you know, she's 31, living her life, doing her thing. But we watch a movie, it's not based in entertainment, it's based on, we have a conversation afterwards. What principles did you extract, right? Like whether we're talking Whiplash, The Count of Monte Cristo, Fight Club because they're of age. But there's so many great principles that can be extracted from the right thing. And the next one on the docket is where I was going to take this. It's The Biggest Little Farm.
Okay.
If you haven't watched it, I think everyone should watch this. I suggest it to almost every business owner that I work with, the ones who are starting to build a culture. I do. It's about a couple who decided to leave the corporate life. They bought acreage in California, and they built a sustainable farm. And it's just a documentary on that process. It is one of the best movies you will ever see. I've never recommended that, and the business owner doesn't come back like, that was absolutely amazing.
Nice.
It's a lot of the example of hard work. It's a lot of example of seasonality. But it's all about the ecosystem and how every little thing on that farm affects every other thing, from pest control, right, to watching over the other animals. And obviously it's the circle of life because it takes place on a farm, right? And so that is a movie I think everyone should watch, because very similarly, we're very stuck in a polarized world, right? Right versus left, and this is the way and this is the way. It takes all of us. If we don't have the right, as it were, we're probably not going to have as much technology. We're not going to have as much big business and all of those things. But if we don't have the left, we don't have art.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have music as much, because you can go into those various fields and you can get a sample size, and it's going to be very reflective of a certain ideology.
Yep.
You can have all the money in the world, but if you have no beauty, what's the point?
True.
Right? You can be a starving artist, but if no one's there to buy the painting, your greatness never gets appreciated.
Yeah.
Right? And all of this.
Yeah. The painting needs the art museum to hang in.
Absolutely.
In order for it to actually achieve its value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. It's something that I hope we can all start to grasp that concept, because we all have different biology, different thought processes, right? Hopefully they're our own thought processes, even though they're not always. But I think the sooner we can get to this line of thinking collectively, the better off we are. And it comes with leadership, and it comes with mentorship, and it comes with building a culture and elevating a standard. And if we can get more people on this path, right, where they may not all be, visionaries, but if they have a vision of a better tomorrow and they have an understanding of how to achieve it, and we have more Yodas to help the Lukes along the way, everyone comes up. It becomes the rising tide.
Yeah. Well, so again, pulling back, that's why I enjoy our conversations. When you talked about the concept of how there's levels to this, right? And there are people who likely think, I'm not Luke Skywalker. I'm not Luke Skywalker. There's people who are Luke Skywalker. I'm not Luke Skywalker. Well, you might not be Luke Skywalker at the national level.
Right.
You might not be Luke Skywalker at the regional level, but I mean, legitimately, a good dad is Luke Skywalker and his family.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, to his children, right? To the woman who he loves, he's the hero. He can do stuff that radically changes their life, even if it's like, I'm not the guy who people are going to be talking about in our area.
Yeah.
There's not going to be streets named after me. I'm not the guy who's going to create a technology that people are going to write about in this. No, but you can absolutely be the hero in the circle that you have. And the other part with that is, I don't know if many of us understand how much farther it could actually go.
Yes.
But it can't happen if it doesn't start
Right.
there, right? Where it's
Right.
like, can you master that circle? And then if you've mastered that circle, is it possible that then there's a greater measure beyond? I taught, I think it was either the last semester or the semester before with men's, but there's that verse where Paul says basically to the people, he says to these men, stop stealing. Start working with your hands and providing for yourselves. And then basically it goes on to say, like, then basically like your work will like bless others. I should look up the verse to be the thing. It's in Ephesians, I believe. And I remember it just stuck with me because it's like literally the picture that I feel like every young man needs to have, where it's like, in all reality, like you're kind of born into this world, like you're just a thief. Like you are not providing value. Right. You are taking from other people something that they've earned and you're using it for your thing. And that's okay when you're a boy. You basically are given free passage to be a thief for the first however many years of your life. Yep. That you are not earning your keep. You're a vacuum of resources that you're pulling into yourself. Yeah. Absolutely. But then there has to be the day that you determine the fact that my hands are going to create order from this chaos to the extent that I no longer have to consume resources from other people's hands, and instead I can provide for myself. And then once you've mastered that circle, you've become the hero in that story, right? Then it's like, is it possible that my hands could produce enough order out of this chaos that I could bring a spouse alongside me, and then I could also not only provide for my own, and this is bigger than even just the like money. This even goes back to your concept of boredom is self-management. Yes. I can manage myself to the place where I can do this. And then even the complexity of adding, for especially a young man, right? Adding a wife into the mix, where then can you not only manage yourself, you can manage the added layer of complexity of the consciousness and talents and beauty and craziness of a wife next to you, right? That I can grasp that concept and say that I can hold that and I can care for her. And her life becomes better when she stands close to me, right? It's not just even the fact that it's like it's a one for one, but like, and not in a prideful way, but like my life blesses her life. The closer she gets to me, the more blessings come into her life because I've created this. And then the crazy concept of going to the place where then you have children and you think that I can create enough order out of this chaos that it blesses theirs. And those circles just keep growing. We're then like, right, it's like, then you can create that for your family, and then perhaps you can be the person that you share that with your immediate extended family, or maybe it's your immediate circle of friends. And then maybe the reality is the Lord would lead you to the place where you could do that at a church-wide level, where like you literally have a community of people of like minds, and you get to share some of that with other people, and it blesses them. And then obviously there are people who the Lord would then choose to bless to the extent that's like, I actually want your influence to extend even beyond that into a community, regional, national, international level, right? But it starts with absolutely like taking on that concept that like you do have a hero's journey. You said something to the extent earlier of like, it was something to the extent of just like letting life happen to you or reacting to life.
Yeah. You're an active participant in your own life. Right?
Yes. And maybe it is kind of like the whole consumption culture we live in with all that. But I feel like that is the case. Then this is literally all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, where it's like, has there been a substantial number of people who've been convinced that their life is happening to them instead of they're happening to their life, right? And that's like, perhaps, like all the way back to like the original sin. Here's Adam
Yeah.
and Eve in the garden,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, you know, right, who's in control in this situation? Do you have to just follow along with whatever's put in your hands, whatever's put in your way? And you can see the delineation, right? Oh, it was the woman you gave me. Oh, it was the snake that you made, right? It's like I'm a victim. And that, of course, the Lord won't stand it, where he's like, you know, like, Adam, I told you to care for your wife. And he's like, right? He's like, I told both of you clearly, like both of you knew. Like, like all the way back, right? Like, is life happening to you, or are you happening to your life? Because every one of us has that capacity, for whatever level we are, to be able to actually take our hero's journey inside that.
Yeah, but I'm not Luke Skywalker. Well, there was a point where he wasn't either.
Right.
You are meant for more, right? I'm a big believer in pray like it's up to God, work like it's up to you. You can take it to levels. God wants you to take it to levels. The only question is, what are you going to do when he puts an obstacle in front of you? That's really an opportunity for your own growth. Are you going to stop at that level?
Yeah.
Are you going to consciously keep going?
Right. Right.
It's a person without an ego is a victim.
Okay. Yeah.
Taking it back to it, ego is a double-edged sword, but if you don't have one, you don't believe that you can get better tomorrow. Well, this happened to me. What are you going to do about it? You have to do something about it. We can look back, and it takes time to look back and understand that red light, Matthew McConaughey, Green Lights, right? Phenomenal book. Get the audio because he narrates and it's in his voice.
Does he say all right sometime in it?
It does happen, yes. It's a book I try to listen to once a year maybe because it's a great reflection of life. It's his life story. And in it, it's green lights because green lights mean go.
Yeah.
You get to a certain point where you look back and you realize the red lights were green lights. You just didn't know at the time.
Ooh.
What are we in, 25? About 4 years ago. Had a vehicle stolen out of our driveway. Nice car, too. Nice car. Red light. Except it was a super high car payment. And I had just walked away from a company I built. And I took a year off work. And I had no revenue, no income. Having that car payment off the plate, green light.
Yeah.
Right? At the time, it wasn't fun going through that process. Like, we had just lost our child 4 months before. And so we were already in grief and trauma and all the things. I remember when it happened, I was up in the morning. Charlie, our youngest, he was up. He looked outside and he's like, did mom go somewhere? I'm just drinking coffee. Like, no, she's in back sleeping. Why? The car's not here. And I looked and I just took a drink and I went, huh. And that was it. Like, that was the only reaction I had, because something that just happened was so much worse in life that this just didn't even affect me.
Yep.
But even in that moment, logically, I was like, well, this isn't good.
Yep.
But it sure was a blessing.
Yep.
The obstacles come, but they're opportunities. And some people, their vision for their life and their desire to be better, more, whatever that means to you, they let it limit them here. It can be so much more, but you got to work like it's up to you. You can pray to God for these things.
Yeah.
We know the adage that when you pray for patience, right? That's not what he gives you.
Yes.
He gives you that opportunity to be patient. You pray for greatness, you're going to have the opportunity. It's going to come at a lower level first, right? Like, it's not like you're going to be on stage with 50,000 people.
Yep.
Can you captivate 5 people?
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
Like, can you even just lead a conversation
Yes.
before you lead a movement.
Yes. There's a Bible verse that says, "Do not despise small beginnings." I think about it all the time. It's not wrong to say I want to speak to 20,000.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Terrific. Do you ever speak to 10?
Yeah.
Like where are you pouring that out? It's so good. Keep going. That's good. Sorry.
But that's what it takes, and that's what we need more of, right? We need more people who are praying like it's up to God, but working like it's up to them. I shared this with you a couple weeks ago offline. I was listening to 104.7, and whoever the DJ was, he was praying that God would take his low back pain away. And my thought was like, my brother, are you deadlifting? Like, are you working out? Are you
Right.
working the muscles around the thing that's making you sore?
Yeah.
Because that's the work.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not, we get 3 wishes on the lamp and it's like, poof, your back pain's
Yeah.
gone. No, you have an injury. You have something in your body going on. This is an opportunity for you to maybe work a little bit harder,
Yeah.
change that lifestyle up a little bit so that you're out of pain because now you're down 20 pounds and you're actually moving more throughout the day.
Yes.
And you're leading a lifestyle where you've got a little bit of health and fitness in there. And now your gut health is improved because your diet improved. And now your gut is making more neurotransmitters,
Yep.
right? And now your brain health is better and your mental health is better. And it all started because you weren't going to be limited by back pain.
Yeah.
And it just goes up levels and levels. And that's just a small individual case.
Yeah, that's good though.
And we need more and more people who they want to be better. And I'm not Luke Skywalker. Neither was he.
Yes.
At one point. It took answering a call and eventually finding Yoda. Sometimes Yoda's a personal trainer. Sometimes Yoda's a pastor. Sometimes Yoda's a guy on the street. But at some point when you answer the call, you get to that level and someone else helps you.
Yeah.
And you go up levels and up levels. And it's just, what does your vision look like, right? And not everything is based on how smart you are. There's all sorts of different intelligences, right? We've got classical intelligence, we call it IQ. Kinesthetic intelligence. Look at a gymnast. They do crazy things,
Yes.
right? Do you have to be classically smart to be that? No.
Yeah.
People are musically gifted, right? Like, oh, I don't need sheet music. I can't play anything, right? There's all sorts of different intelligence. There's so many gifts across the world that we've been given. To what level are you willing to take that greatness inside of you? Do you just want to play locally? Amen. Play locally.
Sure.
Do you want to keep it pushing? Are we trying to fill stadiums? Better believe you got to play locally first.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
People don't start small and build momentum, right? We stack wins. That's how we get momentum. And so when you don't have enough momentum, that resistance comes.
Yeah.
Can you overcome that resistance?
Yeah.
Right? We just need to stack those wins until the momentum's so strong that that resistance, that's just a speed bump. Because it's going to come no matter what, right? That obstacle that's really an opportunity, it comes your way.
Yeah.
Who are you going to be?
Yeah, that's good. I remember years ago a pastor said, like he was given a joke, and he's like, when Sister Nancy comes and asks every week for you to pray for her knees, he's like, you should pray for her knees, but you should also tell her it's time to get on a diet. He's like, you're 100 pounds overweight. Like, that's the reason why your knees hurt. Like, exactly. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong to ask the Lord, your Father, who's gracious, to take away your knee pain, but also, right. Like, but see, that's the difference between the victim or the hero.
Yes.
And what you said, I think is so good because I've experienced it so much in my life. There's that old, I think it's like a Chinese proverb where they say, like, farmer's out and, a wild horse ends
Nothing
up
is
running
good or
into it.
bad.
Yeah, right? And he goes, yeah, what great luck, maybe, right? That his, friend, he gets this wild horse, right? And then, his son gets on the horse, starts breaking the horse kicks him off, breaks his leg. Man, what bad luck. Maybe, right? Next day, the army rolls through to conscript, says, send out your son. My son just broke his leg. Okay, and they move on. What great luck. Maybe, right? That so much of that is like, like you said, even just like the obstacle is like that opportunity. And that's exactly right. Like, right, because to go back to parenting, like, I don't want to kick the goals for my son and be like, good job, bud. Like, that's not what I want. I want him to kick those goals and I want him to develop those skills. The exact same for our Heavenly Father, right? Like, sometimes I wonder, are we literally praying for God to take away things that he's literally like, I put that in your life on purpose so that you could get stronger? God, take this away from me. And he's like, no. Like, I mean, the most epic example, literally, we're coming up on it for Easter, right? Jesus, he goes to his Father and says, like, he's looking forward, and he's wise enough, he's jacked in enough to the Spirit to understand what's coming next, right? He's in the garden and he goes, if possible, would you take this cup of suffering from me?
Yeah.
But because Jesus, of course, is the perfect man who's not leaning into his sinfulness, he says, but your will be done. He's like, I do know that you have the better plan. So if it doesn't move, if it doesn't change, there's a reason why it's in my life, and I'm going to walk through it willingly.
Yep.
And of course, then he does. And the same thing with us. I wonder how many of us were praying for something to be removed, and God's like, actually, I put that there on purpose. Like, you don't need me to move that mountain. You need to climb that mountain,
Yep.
right? Like, because for sure, like, there are things where, like, we can pray, and we should, I like, it's both sides of that statement, because literally that statement of pray as if it all depends on God and work as if it all depends on you. Sometimes it can be used in a way that basically what people are just saying is just work as if it all depends on you. Well, no, the first statement is true as well. The Lord is good and gracious, and we should absolutely like pray, be like, man, Lord, like ask those things. But then the other part is like, right, if I'm praying that a mountain would move and it's not moving, perhaps it's time for me to start kidding myself out to climb this mountain, right? Maybe the reason why the Lord has not moved that yet is because he's like, no, like I want you to climb over this because I want you to go through that hero's journey, because I want you to get stronger legs. I want you to get stronger lungs. I want you to get these things, because if you don't, there's no way you can take the next step that I have for you to be able to build on your life. And again, to tie into what you were saying earlier, it's not the concept of like, because I want to be the biggest, baddest mountain climber ever. It's very often because the reality is like, because there's another circle, close or big, around you that's going to depend on your ability to be able to do that, right? The reason why I was at a conference and Bear Grylls was speaking at it, okay?
Love Bear.
Bear's terrific. He said that when he went through his training, they had this overland course that they had to go over these mountains, right? And he said, we went over these mountains, we come down, we start approaching our CO who's got the trucks there, and he says, we get, 10 yards away from him, he blows a whistle and the trucks drive away. He's like, just like you talk about every bit of like the world crashing around you.
Absolutely.
He's like, the last 36 hours have been the most painful, destructive moments of like your life, like exhausted beyond this. And he looks at us and says, good job. We'll meet you back over those mountains on the other side in another 36 hours. And he says, about half the men turned around, and he said, and half the men just sat down. It's done. And he said, we started walking back, and when we got about 100 yards away from us, he blew the whistle again, and he said, back in formation, and the trucks had done a loop and come back, and everyone got on the trucks and they left. But the guys who sat down were eliminated.
Yeah.
This is Special Forces training. And the CO explained to him, he's like, the reason why that test is so important is because he's like, there will be a day that scenario will happen. You will have a barrier that you think was like, that's the barrier, and you get to the other side. He's like, and there's going to be one more mountain.
Yep.
And he's like, and in that scenario, I'm not going to be here with trucks. He's like, it's going to be you, and your brothers in that unit are absolutely depending that you have the grit to go back over that mountain, or they all die too.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they can just be like, oh, well, half you guys sat down. Okay, well, we're going to keep going. He's like, that doesn't exist in our units. So for those half that sat down, not that he's like even like dogging on them, but he's like, they're not the men for this level.
Yeah.
You have to have that because every one of your brothers in that unit, you're going to get to that spot, and everyone's depending on each other. That we all have the grit to be like one more, right? And like, right, absolutely, that we would develop that level of grit in us to be able to push through and be like, what if it is that opportunity to grow, to develop, to be able to become that person, right? Like even that moment, he didn't even have to go over that mountain again, but he accomplished that moment that proved he has that level of grit,
Yeah.
right? And the whole point is, like I said, it wasn't even about being I'm some BA super soldier. It is the reality is like, right, because everyone's going to be depending on you, and they all fail if you don't have that grit.
It's self-management, right? That
Yes.
moment came where there wasn't a security blanket.
Yep.
Some people crashed, and some people knew it was time to move forward,
Yeah.
right? But we get those opportunities so many times in life. It just comes down to what are you going to do? I pray every day. I pray multiple times a day, typically when I'm driving.
Mm-hmm.
A repeated pattern in my prayer because I ask for big things, right? Like I pray for big things.
Yeah.
But I pray for days that are extremely busy, that start before the sun comes up and don't stop till the sun is well down. And I go to bed exhausted.
Yes.
And I get those opportunities, right? Because that's a life of connectedness. That's a life of production. That's a life of taking steps forward every single day, regardless of how I feel. Because there are days where I'm super tired and the goal is forward.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. But it's all about that self-management. And you are meant for more. What do you want out of this life, right? Anyone can do it. Anyone could have, there were however many, whatever tier operators they are, right? Special forces. And even within that, there were people that when offered the opportunity, just refused to take a step forward.
Yep.
And they just sat down in life and they got removed from the playing field because of that. And if that's not a snapshot of just about everything that we've spoken about today, I don't know what is, because that happens to all of us every single day at varying levels. You are hit with resistance. You are hit where there's a moment where you are truly on your own, whether it's in your thoughts and you don't have a phone at work, whether you get dropped off in the wilderness, right? Like any example of it, and it all comes back to you. And you are meant for more. And what are you going to do at this moment in time when there is the resistance? Have you built up enough momentum throughout your life in the way that you act, in the way that you manage yourself, that this is just another bump in the road, or is this the wall and you stop here?
Yeah.
I think that is probably one of the saddest things that ever happens is people hit that wall and they have a seat. I'm just done.
Yeah.
And they stay at that level forever.
Yeah.
And they never get to step into their purpose. They never get to step into their calling, and they settle for whatever it is that they have in their life. I don't know. I don't know what happens on the other side. But I do believe there is a moment where you sit down with God and he shows you what you're supposed to be. Like, I called you to be this. This is maybe what went wrong. This is where you didn't take advantage of this opportunity that you thought was an obstacle.
Yeah.
And because of these things, you didn't quite make it here. But just so you know, that's what I called you to be.
Yes.
And that is the scariest thing. The scariest thing is not dying. The scariest thing is not living, right? And not finding out who you could have been, what you could have done in life, right? And it's for that reason that I constantly remind people, like, you are meant for more.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard. Last semester of X-Men, don't pray for safety.
Yes.
Right? Pray to be dangerous.
Yeah, amen.
It's coming, no matter what. Don't pray God, keep me safe. God, walk in front of me, lead me.
Yep.
Walk behind me, push me.
Yeah.
And walk beside me on this path.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what level of success you've created, how much money you have. We see celebrities who they commit suicide all the time.
Yep.
And so we know it's not any of that. We know that the journey gets hard. Mm-hmm. It's just about how we react as individuals on a microscopic basis on those decisions. And that determines the levels that we get to, because we're all called to greatness, right? How does that go? God doesn't call the qualified.
Qualifies the called.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what all of this.
Yeah. Totally.
All this existence.
Yeah.
If we can get more people to wake up and realize they're meant for more.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter where you started, because on a daily basis, I work with multi-million-dollar companies, and I work with solopreneurs who are making like $6,000 a month. Mm-hmm. I have a GED. I was thrown out of the military. I grew up rough. Mm-hmm. All of those things, all of those experiences have given me a better understanding of life, of the people that I've worked with in unskilled jobs, right? Stacking bags of dog food 6-7 feet high at PetSmart. I've seen more in life. I have a great appreciation for this, but because I walked this path, I've lived this thing, I know that you are meant for more. And it doesn't matter what your position is in life. It doesn't matter what your education is in life. None of those things matter. Are you willing to will yourself to that next level?
Yeah.
Because the people who start here don't have the capacity of those who start down here. Because this is a fight at an early age. And when you have that much fight, you already have 10,000 hours of overcoming by the time you get to this level. And you've created so much momentum that everything else uphill, that's a cakewalk.
Yeah.
Right? There's no kneecapping. Right? Inequality, all those things, circumstances. But it creates the ability and capacity to be more than anyone could ever expect to be.
Yeah.
Because you've overcome so much so early on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yep. And I think it's the opposite. It's not a self-pride. It's fascinating sometimes in these conversations how it feels like it always ties back to the very first thing, right? We talked about, of like even accepting that spot of like leadership, right? It's not some sense of like this prideful sense. When you say like everybody, I agree, because the Lord says he makes us in his image, and like the level of greatness to which we achieve in our life is a reflection on our Father. It gives him great joy to watch his children become fully what they're meant to be, right? Like, of the handful of things that would break my heart for my children, of course, the fact that they would reject the Lord, because I long to spend eternity with them. But on this world, here and now, what does break my heart is the idea of them being convinced by this world to not become all who they are, for sure. When you talk about the idea of the review in heaven, which, of course, we always think of heaven in regards to you're going to look at all the list of the things that you weren't supposed to do and you did. Well, the Bible says that sin is both doing what we know we should not do, but it also says it is a sin to not do what you know you ought to do. Paul actually describes both, that there is sin of commission and there is sin of omission. When you know this is what I'm meant to do and you don't do it, he goes, that's sin to you, right? And that's a great word for us to remember. That's like literally even down to the smallest things of like, you should apologize. And we go, no, like that's a sin then. You You knew in your heart the Lord prompted to you what was right, and you chose the opposite. And that's a sin, just like doing the wrong thing. Not doing the right thing is. So I agree, the idea of not just here's what you did you weren't supposed to, but here's what you were supposed to, and you didn't, right? Now, thankfully, the entry exam after that is a relationship with Jesus, and it's him instead of our performance. But the first part of that is so true, though, because that's the part of, at the very beginning, he forms the man, and then he breathes life into him. It says he takes the man and he goes, and he breathes the spirit into him, right? And that gift of breath, that gift of life, that gift of like consciousness that comes because we don't see him breathe into any animal. It's not as though it's the ability to breathe, the ability to, the breath is obviously spirit because we see no animals are breathed into. He forms man and he breathes into him. He gives us a spirit and a consciousness that comes from him. And then now that we've received that gift, it's every one of our responsibility to use that gift in a way that reveals the glory of our Lord. And a person who overcomes, a person who goes through their hero journey, who becomes the Luke Skywalker of whatever realm they're in, gives glory to the one who gave them breath.
Yes.
And that's what's astounding for people who are Jesus followers. Sometimes when I hear in the Christian space kind of this vibe of like, we're saved and we're just waiting to go to heaven, I just have this like recoiling in my spirit because I'm like, man, I don't see that in the Bible at all. Like I see Paul and he's radically saved on the road to Damascus, and then Paul, his life is marked by pushing at every barrier of the empire that's around him, even while they're literally like, we will crush you with Rome. Yeah. We will kill you and take away your life. We will do this. And he is so compelled that he goes, I absolutely know what my purpose is, and I will push against. I mean, at that time, I mean, you talk about like even the culture wars we have now. I mean, it's the Roman Empire. Yeah. Like, and still he has this drive of like, I refuse to not take the step that I know the Lord has for me to do. They take the apostles and they bring them in and they go, no more talking about this Jesus. And I love, because I think it's Peter in the thing, he goes, who should we be obedient to? You or to the Lord? And he's like, basically like, you can do whatever you're gonna do, yeah, but I know what I'm called to. And even in the face of certain, like, absolutely, like we will destroy your lives. I will absolutely still continue to push into what I know I'm meant to do, because like, that's my purpose. That's my hero's journey, right? Like he felt that call from Jesus where he's like, you will go and you will spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. And it's like, great. Like, and you see these guys run this out. You see James, like his three best friends, like Peter, James, and John, right? You see James dies early. James actually, right at the very beginning, he has his life demanded of him, and he only got to live out that journey for the matter of maybe months, or maybe a couple of short years, right? And his journey was brief, but he lived out his journey. Yeah. Even in his death, when he's written in there, there's this air of celebration of like, he finished his race. Like, yes, he didn't get to stick around as long as Peter did. He didn't get to stick around as long as John did. But he didn't run away from his calling in these. He ran out his calling to the place where they took his life, they demanded it of him, and still to this day, we celebrate James as a martyr who stood for what he was called to, all the way to the place of like, what if it called your life? And he's like, I refuse to back down from what I know my purpose actually is. I've been convinced by the Lord, right, that my life has a greater meaning than just simply existing. I don't need to add years to my life to have meaning, right? My life will actually have greater meaning if I lean into what it actually means, even if it means I get many less years on this earth, right? Like that the measure of a man's life isn't how many years he occupies and breathes, but the idea of what he actually accomplishes. James does that, and his life is demanded of him. Peter has similar scenarios where he leads into it, walks into the same scenario, and it turns out that for him, God decides to come and send an angel and bring him out of it, because for Peter, Peter's circle was going to be one whole step bigger, where he was going to lead the church in the next season, and he had to do that. And I don't think it's because Peter was any better than James, but James had this level of like, he ran it out and he lived it out, and then Peter ends up going to this whole other level of what he experiences. And then his life is demanded of him. Crucified upside down. Says, don't let me be crucified right side up, for people might mistake me as the Lord. I'm not the Lord, right? Humility. I'm not the one who's the guy in charge. My life is, again, a reflection of the one who gave me breath. Okay, that's what I'm doing. And then you have John, who then sticks around longer than any of them. The last apostle who is around. He goes to Patmos. He's boiled in oil, survives, shipwrecked. And then in that moment, the Lord has sustained him, because then he receives a word from the Lord, and he pens the revelations that says the Lord is coming back soon. And God keeps him longer so that his influence could continue. I mean, literally to this day, people ponder over Revelation, right? But yet again, right, it's each one of those men lived out their hero's journey despite all of these things and overcome these mountains to be able to do that. And it's a reflection of how good like God is. It's not, none of those men, I'm sure they struggled with it at the time because we're humans, but like even reading their stories, you really aren't convinced that you're like, wow, they're amazing men. You see the faithfulness of God in their life. And what they did was humbly, they attacked and pushed through and overcame whatever their mountain was that was in front of them, right? And it gave God glory every single time. And we would have never had the faith we have if it would have been people who pacified themselves and just sat down and said, I'm going to wait for heaven.
Yep.
They had to accept that idea from the Lord that it's like you should consider what your life might accomplish. You should consider how you might take this life, and you might squeeze every bit of it out, right?
Yep.
I mean, that goes back to literally Jesus saying, he who tries to hold on to his life will lose it, but he who lets go of his life will find it, will keep it, right? And it's like literally that concept where he's like, if you're so afraid of like losing anything, he's like, you're never going to become what you're actually meant to be.
Absolutely.
Back to sacrifice, right? You have to let go of that and be like, well, what if it doesn't, you know? I just had a young guy. He's starting a business currently. And I'm just encouraging him, meeting with him, trying to get him encouraged with it, you know? And one of the first conversations we had when he pitches this idea and he's talking about what's happening next with this business. And he says, you know, like, do you think it could succeed? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I do. Like everything you're talking about, wise and all of these. But I said, I think you should do it even if it wasn't going to succeed. The guy's, you know, I think he's like 25 years old, 26 years old.
Perfect.
And I was like, if you knew today this was not going to succeed, I was like, I still think you should do it.
Absolutely.
You should go push, and you should try to build, and you should try to start this, and you should grind, and you should work these extra hours past what you're doing to provide for your family currently, and you should run out your dream, and you should give it all you have. And even if in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're like, it didn't work, I was like, you will be so much better for it because you actually pushed into that instead of just sitting down and being like, well, you know, this job pays the bills. This job pays for this. Man, what you would lose by not leaning into that opportunity.
It's not about the success of that first thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the development of grit,
Mm-hmm.
the work capacity, the ability to push through long hours, the lessons learned.
Yes.
It is super rare that because we're talking business,
Yep.
any entrepreneur, like they hit the home run the first time.
Right.
You just don't hear about the stories of failure until you hear about their biography that reveals it,
Yes.
right? It is extremely rare that
Yep.
I'm going to start the business and it's going to be the thing. No, the whole path is marked with failure, because understanding from a first person perspective of what not to do
Yes. Yes.
is just as important as understanding what to do. And there's glory in it. The glory comes from the effort, the lessons learned, right? If we're talking about the length of life and the sacrifice for Christ,
Yes.
when you watch the Olympics, there's someone running a marathon and there's someone running 100, and they both get gold, right? The glory is in running the race.
Yeah.
It's being the man in the arena.
Yep.
It doesn't matter the length of it. And so if this first venture fails after 3 years,
Right.
you have 3 years of skill building, and you have a lifetime of understanding what to do next,
Yes.
because it's about iterations. It's about seasonality, right? Knowing that, okay, I tried to deliver an amazing service here. These things, they didn't go right. Or I was really good at delivering the service itself, but not enough people knew about it, right? You can have the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it, no one can buy it.
Absolutely.
And so maybe I need to figure out marketing next. I was getting a lot of conversations, but I wasn't getting a lot of customers. Maybe you need to figure out sales next.
Yep.
Actually, you know what? I was constantly busy delivering the service. I had a lot of attention and I was really good at sales, but I was working 100 hours a week. Okay, maybe you need to understand systems creation.
Yep.
Maybe you need to understand how to leverage technology a little bit
Yep.
better, right? And it's just all these iterations that give us sustaining success,
Yeah.
because no one gets it right the first time.
Yeah.
It's just, are you willing to continue to get back up?
Yeah.
After you've been knocked down over and over and
Yes.
over. Because we all get put in those situations, right? We talked earlier about how a first year pastor is going to have conversations, all the emotions,
Yep.
right? Anxiety, overwhelm. Sometimes you start to well up where, you know, you might feel the tears and you're holding them back. But after 12, 15 of these conversations,
Yep.
I know what's going to happen. I've been here before.
Yeah.
I've failed at this. And so at 3:00 in the afternoon that day, when I was having a shower, I realized, well, that's what I should have said.
Mm-hmm.
And it all goes back to the very beginning and greatness, and how it's the thing that becomes so consuming that there is no balance, because everything becomes attached to this and the way that you operate. And it isn't a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
The hero's journey, being great at something. There's no 9 to 5. It's not, I shut it off. It's, you're taking it with you through all times. I'm certain you work at night. I'm certain you work early mornings, because you have a calling.
Sure.
You have a responsibility.
Yep.
And you have a vision that you're trying to fulfill. Everyone should have that.
Yeah. Agreed.
Everyone can have that, right? Like, anybody can do it. Not everyone will,
Yes.
but they could
Yes.
if they realize they were meant for more.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's all it comes down to, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Awakening. Actually realizing there's a hero journey ahead of you. Each person can be Luke Skywalker in their own plane. Critical that you find a Yoda.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to get out of your own arrogance, though,
Yeah.
because you're going to need to actually look for people who can speak wisdom, who can actually be part of that circle around you, right?
If you think you know everything, you won't seek wisdom.
No.
That's what prevents growth, is the arrogance of knowledge and being a know-it-all.
Yeah.
None of us is as smart as all of us.
Agreed.
And so it's finding a mentor.
Yep.
It's finding someone who walked that path, right? For you, it's listening to a 70-year-old who moved heaven and earth with a simple conversation.
Yep.
Because it was done with such an expert lens that it was so seamless that it was just a conversation. It was just a talk.
Yeah.
But to the younger person in the audience who was willing to receive, it was life-changing.
Yep.
Right? Like
Yeah, it's so good.
we have to look for those people.
Yeah.
And they're all around us. And sometimes it's our father.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's someone else's father. Right? Like I know that you had that for a father because the first night of Acts Men in the last semester, I sat at his table.
Yep.
And I could pick it up like that. Right? And those people sometimes work in a machine shop. Those people sometimes are at a barber shop. It's just looking for them.
Yeah.
And listening.
Yeah.
It's being still. It's self-management. It's not being on the phone. It's just being aware. And God's blessings just pour down. You just never know where he's going to position the opportunities and the guides, but they're all along the way for all of us.
Yeah, it's so good. I like that. This is good.
Really good.